Hi, my name is Jaideep Singh. I'm a senior manager with Informatica, and I lead the data governance and privacy journey for professional services. I've been with Informatica for 12 years and helping customers operationalize their data governance initiatives using Informatica technologies. We'll be conducting a series of webinars on different aspects of implementation and some implementation-related best practices. So please stay tuned for other sessions on data privacy, data governance, and data lake data governance. Today, our main focus would be on data quality data governance, but at the same time, we'll cover other aspects of implementation, some of the key aspects given the limited time here. We'll start with the use case decomposition, then pilot implementation flow and best practices, typical org model. We'll talk about how to break a business outcome into day in the life of scenarios and then convert the day in the life of scenarios into technology-specific execution flows. And then we'll close the session with a short demo and Q&A. Thank you.
Problem decomposition. What we do in this scenario is find outcome, and we work with our positive business outcome, like better negative consequence, lawsuit, something. What I want to do is define for the industry. Usually the outcomes are blocked by business problems, which could be oriented, process oriented. What I want to do is really get a discussion going about what that means. For that. Critical data elements then are the pieces of information, conceptual or physical data fields that support that business outcome. And so the ability to manage these critical data elements might be part of the business problem as well. So part of our decomposition is to understand where those things live. And I'll give a specific example. Systems then are where this information lives. Critical data elements residing in one or more systems in your. These systems may be a data warehouse, it could be an application like other proprietary system. That systems contain data sets. So again, conceptual, looking at tables of information, content you're managing, conceptual areas, maybe even a report like a Tableau, Power BI, something like that, holding information relevant to informing the business problem. Data sets contain attributes. So attributes can be specific data fields, and we'll see in the next example something like a claim type or a claim amount. Critical data elements, though, also feed KPIs, so specific business targets you're trying to support as you manage your data. KPIs are closely tied to metrics, so these would be very specific measures that you're trying to handle, such as, again, a percentage of better customer retention, customer satisfaction scores, claims amounts, things like that that could feed into supporting the business outcome overall. And then these are often supported by critical data rules, data policies, et cetera. So thinking about things like a level of data quality or potentially a policy like a CCPR, PIPEDA, something like that, that is feeding into the support of that data information. The rules then also tie to those attributes. So the attributes themselves may have data quality rules, they may be tied to specific policies, et cetera. So these are the things you want to manage on a case-by-case basis as you start to build out your model. Let's take a look at a very specific example. So looking at property casualty insurance. So a very common use case that everyone has to deal with, positive or negative on a day-to-day basis. As you know, if you work with any organizations and watch any amount of television, you'll see that all the property casualty insurers are fighting for customers. And so you may have Allstate and State Farm and Farmers, et cetera, all looking to grab the other's customers. One of the big issues that you have in property casualty insurance is claims adjudication. And so this would be, I have a minor fender bender, or I have a larger multi-car accident. I want that claim resolved. And the way that you resolve that claim is going to impact how I feel about you as a company. So this is certainly an outcome that a P&C insurer would like to support. So if you look at a business problem, behind that, customers have an ability to determine their status. They don't know who to contact next. They can't find out what their claim amount may be when their check is showing up. They will have issues and maybe abandon your organization. These then are supported by critical data elements. So what's going to feed into that business outcome? You'll have policy record, claims record, agent information, maybe the call center information, the first time somebody contacted you, whether by voice or by mobile phone. Systems then that are holding these critical data elements include something like a industry standard policy management application, like a Guidewire. You may have a claims management application that's not part of that system or tied to it that has data moving between it and the policy management application. You might have your customer service application that would be supporting that initial call or receiving notices that the claim has been filed. And then maybe a content management application that's holding scanned images or digital photos of the event and so on. These would be the systems you need to get insight into to manage this use case. The data sets underneath those systems then getting a little more tactical. So policy header, policy detail, the claim amount, the CSR call tracking application. So just data about how long ago that first call came in. Again, feeding the business outcome if we can know how long this claim has been outstanding. Then you have the attributes beneath that. So again, the type of claim, the amount of the claim, typically something that's a low dollar value will be quicker to resolve, also lower impact for the customer, something that's a multi-car accident with injuries, that becomes a very high claim amount and very complex. So what you'd like to do is be able to understand these components and get very good tight handle on the data so that you understand how to manage it. Things like, is it of high quality? Is it in the right place? Did I lose it in a transformation between applications? KPIs then behind this are net resolution time. How long did it take to resolve that claim? The customer satisfaction score. So after the fact, I want to look at how happy they are and are willing to continue with us as a company. And the degree of automation. So you're able to support, let's say, a high level of robotic process automation so that the quick and easy claims don't need human interaction. And I can just route those to a claims adjudication robot and fire off a check as soon as that's ready. You also want to monitor that customer satisfaction, look at overall cycle time reduction. So don't keep people waiting. If we can resolve a claim within 72 hours instead of 40, then that's, or instead of a couple weeks, then that's much better. Then also looking at the rules behind it. So if you have policy alignment, are we capturing things like managing CCPA, managing PII, PCI rules? Also looking at the scorecards that tie back to those attributes. So the attributes themselves, you have things like that claim date should be a date in the past. The call duration should be something reasonable, like between 1 and 10 minutes. And these are things you can apply data quality rules to support your goals of eventually meeting that business outcome, solving that business problem. Typically in our cases, we have a variety of users, of personas that are helping to manage the platform. So they all have different goals. They will ask different questions about the way you manage, about the way they manage information. For example, if a developer wants to know, what's the impact if I change this data column? Who will get impacted by it if I have a chain of 3-4 systems feeding into a dashboard? If I change one thing, what's the impact? That's what a developer wants to know, and something they can find out of Axon, EDC, etc. The BI analyst may want to know, is this the right report for looking at global sales? Does it trace back to the right data elements to feed that report? Other roles you see here. So from a senior executive, they want to know overall data security standards, legal standards, etc. So are we Are we compliant with CCPA? Are we compliant with FINRA rules, et cetera? And others down the line, as you see. So a finance executive wants to know, what's the definition of EBITDA? Am I managing this the right way? And what are the 12 components that feed into it? An auditor wants to know, what is my risk level? Can you show me the lineage when I'm tracing from the source system to a data warehouse to a business dashboard that I'm using to make decisions on? And so you see different products in the Informatica stack feed into this in different ways. So we have EDC as that enterprise data catalog that is helping the developer. We have Axon, which is the business glossary that's helping a BI analyst to answer questions from a business perspective. We have senior executives more typically using a business glossary like Axon, as this is more of a business user-friendly application versus looking at rows and columns as schemas that EDC might be. Similarly, a data scientist might be looking at Axon as well as EDC to find profiling and locating specific numbers related to the census policy that they're trying to follow. The data steward might be more focused on data quality. And so using Axon as the dashboard to feed into a data quality report to be able to understand is that report data, is it feeding across the right level of applications in the right way, transforming appropriately and not getting out of range. Auditor then is more of an Axon business user focus, as well as EDC, because we want to be able to trace end to end where that data is coming from and where it's going to land as it moves through our system landscape. Then finally, we have more business focused questions here down below, looking at the line of business user, the self-service BI user. These are folks that just want to understand, where do I find that definition of that? What's the business glossary? And then overall, who owns that claims data set? Who's the steward I can contact? So I'll give you kind of a flow of how these work through an end-to-end process. So just some typical use cases, drilling into some of those that were captured above. So if you're the data scientist looking at a potential inaccuracy, my value at risk. So they see a number that doesn't really fit. So how can they get more detail about where this comes from? So they observe that there's a value that they don't like. So the first thing they want to do is look in the business glossary. See, where does that information come from? So if I'm looking at, my end report, I'll look at the data set because that's how that dashboard is defined, and the glossary item that links to that particular data. From that, I can look into, get a nice map view of the data quality and say, well, okay, the validity and accuracy are both below standard. So that's not good. So I'm going to need to contact the data quality owner to get a better understanding of where that came from. Axon will tell you that lineage. So systems, data sets, attributes that link back to that the source of that data. So you've got a piece of data on that Tableau dashboard, and I want to pull back and see where that came from. EDC is going to tell me that information. And I can look in more detail at that scorecard by contacting that data quality specialist. Where did that validity challenge come from? Is it because that new data set we just imported had 20% blank or null fields, and that threw off my quality number? Now we can really understand what that root cause is. You see all the platform working together is helping you answer this list of questions so that you can get to solving that business problem of accuracy driving my business. Here's another example, looking at, again, a report for global sales reporting. So we just want to understand where I can find the right report to run for global sales. So again, a consumer use case versus a creator. So the system, you may look for Tableau as a system because we know this is where all my business dashboards live. From here, I can search using Unison. I can drill into a low level of detail to find out what contains that report. What are the sales-oriented reports? Find the right one. Again, still using Axon. We're all in a very business-focused use case here. From here, I can look at the attributes within that report. Okay, here's the 17 data elements that help fill out that Tableau report. I can also see where they came from. And I can look at the level of business quality and attach on that full report, run a data quality map and see where they came from, and also see the level across my attributes. So where there are incompletions, where there are inaccuracies, where there are invalidities in the data, so that I can tell this report I'm about to produce, is it typically of high quality, or is there suspect data behind it? These are all key things we'll need to worry about so that we're producing good information for our end users. And then finally, if there are challenges and we see a piece of data is consistently inaccurate, I can look to EDC, look to Axon, and see who's the data steward, who's the technical steward for that, and answer questions about that data. So as we implement these, we look to have a very consistent implementation flow. And so a lot of our projects start out with a smaller pilot where an organization is looking to connect Axon, EDC, DQ, DPM, et cetera, to produce an overall end-to-end flow to support their use cases. So in these areas, what we'll often do is start with a smaller set of information, 10 to 15 critical data elements. And out of these, we'll run this activity to really prove out the connection. So if we look at initially having the kickoff, so the kickoff is, what are those prerequisite activities, such as installing the applications, linking them together, making sure they talk, making sure we have the connections from EDC and DQ out to their data sets, so having the appropriate read access to those applications so that we can get to the data we need. We look at enablement activities. And so the enablement activities follow from the kickoff, where we've enlisted our participants for the pilot. And now we do enablement activities, which means basic search and retrieval out of Axon, navigating through a map in EDC, viewing a DQ maplet, and looking at scorecards. These are all things to get the team, which is typically 4 to 5 people, a smaller team, and as part of the pilot, get them up to speed with what the product set is doing, so that we can execute the pilot and more success. So if you look at the execution phase, this is really running the pilot. So we have the core team, your core team, working with us to lead the activity. And in this activity, we're executing the pilot activities. And these may be things like onboarding data into EDC, curating it, creating any custom lineage, and feeding that into Axon. Then Axon, making sure that it is the right data that's been moved appropriately, it's been assigned to the right business glossary, and that we are now able to run reports against it or build dashboards and show impact analysis, whatever those consumer use cases may be. The second round, we'll do that same set of activities. Then the participants in the pilot, the new data stewards, they're going to run it themselves with a little bit of help from the core team. And then finally, the third round of the pilot, which is again another enablement activity, is adding on a few more critical data elements, but doing it on their own with only ad hoc assistance from the core development team. And so they're able to run it on their own and then just call in with office hours when they've got particular questions about how well an activity ran. Then we look at building an initial dashboard for the standards. So we want to look at how quickly were people able to get through a workflow? Did we have high quality? If we had change requests implemented where they met, did we meet the SLA for that change request? So these things will help us really understand how well the pilot's working. And then finally, from that, updating guidance and instructions about the pilot so that we've got a good feedback flow into running the next one. Because this same flow is what you're going to do for the next round of critical data elements. So if we started from a subset of P&C claims information, maybe we'll start with the low value claims and then move to the high value ones, or start in auto claims and then move to home claims as the second one, which are similar activities, but then rolling out the same flow. So enabling new stewards, running the pilot, checking the results, and improving the process all along. We find this is a great repeatable solution for moving forward. So the organization that really helps build this, so this is really a best practices flow where we have an overall governance group that we need guiding this. So your project sponsor, so the overall business lead, business sponsor, champion of the whole exercise, working together with project management team and their own IT leadership to support the flow of activities. Typically, there is a team then that supports it. So you have your customer business team, which would be line of business project manager, enlisting data stewards, analysts, data scientists, SMEs. These are folks that are going to have an interest in data quality, the business definitions of the glossary, as well as the technical location of the information. We have the project manager then, which is supporting the overall governance initiative. So we would have to have enterprise stewards. So this is more at the top level of the enterprise organization, making sure that line of business 1, 2, and 3 are in line with overall corporate directives. And we have the project manager from an implementation perspective who's responsible for a data governance principle, strategic advisors, other consultants that are helping to actually implement the use cases. And so they'll be the ones day to day entering business glossaries and running scans and EDC, et cetera, to verify that it's working. Key aspect there too is trainers and change management. So you've got folks that are supporting the overall creation of reusable assets. So we've got job aids, et cetera, being built all along the way so that the next stewards have something to go to as a reference. And then finally, from an IT perspective, you have the IT-focused individuals like your database administrators, system administrators for things that you're scanning. You'll have administrators for LDAP and SSO, other cloud data access, et cetera. These are all critical to getting the product stack working with the appropriate data sources that we're going to use to drive the project.
Thank you, David. So David just kind of gave you a few examples of the day in the life of scenarios, which were stemming from certain business outcomes that you're expecting. Before I talk about the technology-specific execution flow samples related to the day in the life of, I wanted to discuss another important topic, and that's operating model. Operating model in our language refers to certain design elements or customizations or configurations that are necessary to not only streamline the implementation process, but making sure that the user experience remains consistent from users coming from different constituencies, do things the same way, and they're guided on how to do it. There are two aspects of operating model. One is the technology agnostic operating model, which is your org council, your vision, your day in the life of, and all those things. So we are not talking about that. What we are focusing on is the technology operating model to facilitate the use case execution and unified experience. Due to the time limitation, we won't be able to get into details on all of these considerations over here, but I will briefly touch upon one or two of them to emphasize on the importance of these. For example, something as simple as Axon facets. It's like Axon has a lot of facets, but it doesn't make sense to roll out all of those to your users. It may confuse or overwhelm them. So looking at the use case that the users are interested in and the outcome that they're wanting, only those Axon facets should be considered in your target operating model, and then users should be enabled on how to consider them, how to leverage them, and over time more facets can be added to make to consider additional use cases or additional scenarios. Other aspect is glossary taxonomy is another important part of the operating model, where typically users tend to load flat list of glossary terms, which are probably inspired by data dictionaries, which they have, and they are trying to use those to jumpstart their glossary. taxonomy is a very important part where you look at a simple taxonomy over here. These are the key data domains: customer, client, provider. Then subdomains within those, like within customer, we have member, consumer, account holder, prospect as subdomains. Within subdomains, you may have categories like member demographic information could be a category. And then within those categories, you would have leaf level terms. So this kind of simple structure drives a certain behavior, which, for example, if I'm a user, I have a brand new term to add, and I come here, I will traverse through the taxonomy. So not only provides me additional context on my business, how my business is laid out, but it also forces me to think, where does the term I'm trying to add fits? Which domain, which subdomain, which category? Do I need to add a new category for my term because there's nothing relevant over there? Or there is a category, but there is a term which looks very similar to what I'm trying to add. So should I consider merging them, or should I reuse that? So a taxonomy drives a lot of behavior and keeping this information contextual so that it's meaningful and usable. Other aspect of the operating model is the workflow. So while not all day in the life of scenarios requires workflows, and we don't recommend that because workflows do add a lot of processing and makes your process cumbersome. But certain scenarios, especially where cross-function collaboration is required, may require BPM workflows. So identifying those scenarios upfront and creating standardized workflows upfront is crucial. Otherwise, users will try to do it different ways. Different line of business will try to do it different ways, and there would not be a unified experience across the board. Related to workflows, the stakeholder metrics or the roles metrics is a necessary considerations, where what roles would you want to capture as part of the chain of custody or the stakeholder metadata versus what role will play a role or participate in the workflows. The typical best practice is that not all users should participate in a workflow. It makes it very heavy, very cumbersome. So we typically recommend facilitating a lot of information through data stewards, where the workflow helps you drive the accountability and help you maintain an audit trail of what went on and then evidence of the things that happen. But at the same time, it doesn't require you to create 10 different swim lanes and having all those users come in here and participate. So you can facilitate a lot of activities through data stewards. But designing them upfront and trying them out prior to rolling out to different line of businesses is crucial, and is another part of operating model. So as I mentioned, there are different aspects where you may want to consider prior to you executing your use case, and these things become a good basis for your implementation process. A few minutes ago, David discussed some sample day in the life of scenarios. Part of the reason why we emphasize on approaching your use case from this perspective is that you have a certain outcome in mind. As a result of that outcome, you would have different personas who will participate in this process, and those personas are going to want to do certain activities, achieve something in these tools. So considering a data quality scenario, there could be different things. For example, users may, from data quality perspective, they may want to do root cause analysis. That could be one day in the life of scenarios. A situation where users found a data quality issue, but they want to collaborate with their counterparts to either fix the issue, standardize information, or just put some validations in place so that they are more aware of how trustworthy the data is. Identifying critical data elements and rules around it could be another day in the life of scenarios, and onboarding those critical data elements for data quality is another day in the life of scenarios. So if we look at things from the perspective of different personas, different constituents or users, and what is it that they are going to have to do in these technologies to achieve these outcomes, then we can break it down into execution flows. And where that thought process comes from is typically in the beginning of implementations, we have noticed that our customers, especially the new personas who are just being introduced to these programs, these technologies, they struggle to make sense of things. So if we start from their perspective, what is their role in this process? What are they supposed to do? And in a process flow, in an execution flow, if they can see where their personas plays a role, what part their persona play, and then if we give them the detailed instructions to perform that job, then it is much easier for them to understand how to go about this process. So digging deeper into the data quality context, broadly speaking, when we talk about use case scenarios or data lab scenarios, we look at it two different ways. One is the contributor kind of day in the life scenarios, where people who are supposed to participate in the content onboarding in these tools, cataloging information, enriching that information. And the other category is consumers, people who would just come into these solutions, this platform, to just make use of it, to find some information, to drive certain behavior. For example, somebody coming in to just do some root cause analysis on a data quality issue and a report is a consumer kind of persona, versus people, stewards and librarians who are supposed to help build this content are contributors. So we would have scenarios for both of them and execution flows for both of them. For any data quality program, one of the key aspects is the identification of critical data element. This topic by itself needs a lot of focus, where different line of business have SMEs, stewards, they are all responsible for identifying their critical data elements. Typically, we help our customer put a CDE identification process in place just to kind of help them streamline their process of how to identify CDs, what makes up a CD, what are some of the examples, how to categorize your critical data element. But at the end of it, your critical data elements are elements that make or break certain part of business. Those are crucial to you. If those are crucial to you, then the next step is, what does good look like for these CDs? What are the data quality expectations? If I have a particular CD, it will manifest in different systems in terms of physical tables and attributes on files. Then what are the expectations with that data? What criteria should it meet? So identifying those criteria, those rules, becomes the basis of the program. Once that expectation setting is done here, these elements are critical to us, and these are our expectations around them. Then it goes further than that. We're identifying where this information is, and then tracking how trustworthy it is. So for data quality, typically, just to provide you a few examples, it's a common approach for our customers, our users, to kind of identify CDEs and then document the expectations around it so that the data quality scorecards can be created and users know how trustworthy the information is. And then also giving them some sort of scenario, some sort of facility where they can collaborate with their counterparts to either fix information or validate it. So this is the sample critical data element onboarding process flow. Please keep in mind that depending upon how your organization is structured, your culture, these will differ from customer to customer. This is just a typical flow that we are providing here, just to kind of have a conversation around this process. So if we look at the data quality scenario, then eventually, as I said, we will look at the different activities that different personas need to do. This one is just specific to one day in the life of, which is critical data element onboarding. So if you look at the first step over here, the idea is that stewards will propose critical data elements working with their business counterpart. They will propose critical data elements specific to a business area or data domains. And then they will work with different SMEs, different counterparts, to agree on the definition of those critical data elements, assign the stakeholders, identify and assign the stakeholders. And this is a contributor kind of process flow, by the way, that we're just talking about. They are contributors and consumer flows. So this is a contributor kind of flows where we are building the catalog. So assigning stakeholders become an activity. This whole flow may or may not be turned into a workflow, or can be turned into multiple workflows. So this is just a process flow to kind of guide on what are these personas used to do in these different technologies. So steward assigned stakeholders in Axon. Now, once we have identified our critical data elements and at least started documenting them, their definition, and found their stakeholders, the next step is, we do know we care about these elements. Next step is to find out now which all systems do these elements exist in, manifesting. So that's where in Axon, mapping to data domains, or just generally mapping to EDC data domains, whether we would identify, hey, we care about social security number, credit card number, customer first name, last name. So let's see if we have EDC out-of-the-box data domains that can help us discover it. Wherever we don't have them, let's see if we have a need of custom data domains, and they need to be developed. But the starting of the discovery and tagging process starts from here. Now, coming into EDC, the auto discovery and tagging functionality, or the clear functionality of EDC, can help you discover where are the potential occurrences of this information that you care about, these critical data elements that care about. So in this system, in this table, or in this file system, in this file, there's a potential, there's a social security number, there's a 70% probability. Then leading to curation of that information. So the discovery process presents possibilities, but with the help of the users, that information is curated, verified, and also the metadata enrichment provide additional information over there. And then at this point, at least we have the identification of where this information is that we care about, what systems and applications. Then through auto onboarding functionality of this platform, this information that has been identified can be auto onboarded in terms of data sets and attributes back into Axon, where it is available to users, either business users or stewards, for further curation, where they can define a conceptual view of it, where it can be put on the fingertips of the non-technology users primarily. Okay. At this point, since we have identified which systems or applications these critical data elements exist in, it can be turned over to a DQ specialist who can, based on the expectation around these data elements, they can do some profiling analysis, and based on that, the nature of the data and the analysis, the stewards can document the data quality rule around it. So if you look at it, at the end of such a process flow, you will have a basic catalog built in where you have some business definitions, some expectation around those business definitions, stakeholders are there. You have the lineage in the physical world, and then information from the physical world is onboarded back into Axon in user-friendly terms, where it's easier for people to understand. And through the involvement of a DQ specialist, the rules are documented. So at least this becomes the basis. Anybody who's looking at this piece of information, let's say I search here social security number, I can see what criteria am I supposed to meet if my system has social security number. So this was a contributor kind of process flow. So we just looked at a contributor kind of execution flow. Let's look at the consumer execution flow. The premise of this flow is that a user has found a data quality issue, but they want to collaborate with the DQ specialist or their other counterparts to either put a validation in place or fix the issue. Again, keeping in mind that this is just representational. We're just assuming that these are the people who are supposed to perform these activities, which may change from organization to organization. So in this particular case, a request comes in from a user, stewards, or a business user about a data quality issue. The data quality specialist does some analysis and profiling to understand the nature of the issue. They may determine that it's an operational issue where a process broke and then something, and because of that, the issue happened, and they can route it accordingly. Or at this point in time, they can provide additional details to the stewards. In many cases, the stewards or business users are enough functional enough to be able to do this activity themselves. So as I said, that's all representational. But based on the analysis, the steward can either refine or define the rule. They may already have a rule which they may want to revisit based on the new findings, or the rule is already in place. Typically, in order to put validations in place to kind of get that kind of collaboration going, a lot of our customers have some sort of abstraction layer between Axon and whatever technology they are using to perform DQ validations. If it is IDQ, then we have out-of-the-box integration, so no abstraction layer necessary. But we created a placeholder where a lot of our customer may be doing validation. In certain cases, maybe non-IDQ technology. So just creating some sort of hand-holding mechanism over there, creating an entry from the rule that was supposed to be validated, so that eventually when the users have validated that rules, they can supply back the score by this hand-holding mechanism. So continuing on, then implementing the DQ rule in IDQ or whatever technology. From there on, the rule gets registered in Axon so that the scores can be supplied back, and the users or stewards can see the red, green, and amber against the rule that they wanted to track. Then running that IDQ rule, loading those results, and then the stewards can validate results and close this flow saying, hey, this is the rule that I was interested in, this is the data element that I was interested in tracking, and now I have the process in place and I can see the score against that. So this is just a sample consumer kind of execution flow where consumer want to collaborate with other users to make something happen. So these are just samples, but depending upon your scenarios, the idea behind these is that once you break whatever activities you need to do in these tools, whatever outcomes you need to achieve into these persona-specific execution flows, then coming as a user, I can identify my persona, let's say I'm a data steward, then I know where do I fit in the overall process in the execution flow, what are my steps, and in what technology am I supposed to do. Now, taking it to a next step, if you trace back from the business outcome was broken into the day in the life of, then the life was broken into these technology specific and persona specific execution flows. At this point in time, I know what I need to do, but I don't know how to do it. So taking it to the next level, this is where your operational runbook come into picture, where this is just a sample of a cross section of the how to section of the operational runbook, where for each of the execution step in the process flow, let's say a data steward is supposed to do curation of metadata enrichment. Yes, they know they need to do this activity, but how? So this is where they can drill down to the operational runbook section where they have the screenshot instructions of how to do it, what to do and what not to do when doing those activities, some best practices around it, because it's not just a matter of how to, but also what to avoid and what to consider. If they run into some basic issues, can they help themselves? Troubleshooting instructions over there. And in the end, if they still get stuck and not able to move forward, then a way for them to get help. So if we establish that kind of process where coming from a certain outcome, users can identify what they're supposed to do, what their steps are, and then for each step, what the detailed instructions are and how to get help, we can create a unified, streamlined experience for all users, and it makes it easier to onboard users into these solutions, these technologies, and keep it purpose-driven, keep it outcome-driven. Just so we leave enough time for question and answers towards the end, I'm going to do a quick demo to level set on some of those concepts that we have been discussing. So we were discussing the CDE onboarding sample execution flow, which is a contributor kind of execution flow. So users can onboard certain critical data elements in Axon. They can define the definition of those elements and then assign stakeholders on those. At this point, if you consider, even if the users are enabled on the features and functionalities of different part of the solution, it's very hard for them to make sense of how to use them together in what sequence to drive a specific behavior or user scenarios. And that's where these execution flows that we were talking about come into play, where users have a clear idea that to achieve a certain outcome, these are the steps they need to follow. So if I'm a user sitting in Axon and I have done my initial part about defining it, I know that I should switch over to EDC at this point to do discovery and curation so that I can find out which all systems and applications have this information and democratize that. So in this case, the city field has been discovered in locality complete column of a specific table with 76% probability. Curation is an important aspect of data governance where users, subject matter experts, and data stewards can work together to refine and fine-tune these results. This is an iterative process where they can tweak the rule, rerun the scans a couple of times, and at some point in time, they can accept, reject the results that they like or don't like. Once we have the results curated in EDC and the discovery is done, we have two choices. We can either semi-automated way where EDC brought this information here from, and then we can, through managed linking, we can onboard them into Axon or either associate them to assets in Axon. But EDC also allows auto onboarding of these assets in Axon where the data sets and attributes can be auto onboarded and would be available to users for curation. Upon curation, the users will be able to get to a point where they have this information available, and the consumer kind of personas can come and make use of this information. In this particular example, consumers come and they search for a city field. So immediately they would know that city field exists in 12 different applications, in 22 data sets, 14 attributes. They can go to a graphical view of the same information and they can do different overlays. Which data sets have city field? In warehouse, customer list data set is receiving data from party address master. Both have city related information, and they can do attribute overlay to understand which fields are representing cities. So, and then if you click on it, you can find out lineage. And all of this has been built through the contributor kind of user scenario, basically, right? And then we could do data quality overlays on top of that to understand how the data quality varies from system to system. And this, at this point in time, another consumer kind of user flow comes into picture, where these users say that, hey, I want to collaborate with someone to raise to fix this issue or standardize the rule on this. So they can raise a change request on that data set where they found the data quality to be low, and then give us a certain sort of description that for the issue collaboration, and then start a workflow to collaborate with other counterparts and stakeholders to fix that issue. So these were just a few examples of how the different functionalities in different part of the solution can come together in forms of solving different problems and user scenarios. Before we get to Q&A, our last thing over here is that if you have any questions or follow-ups after today's session, please feel free to reach out to us. I have given contact details for our regional directors for IPS North America, Chris Main and Paul Yu, and my details are also here. We can help you in many different ways, whether it's just a follow-up session to some of the details that we shared today. We can do workshops or assessments or even engagements for our customers. Feel free to reach out to us if you need any additional details or help. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining and listening into the session today. We have been getting some questions, so this is actually time to bring up additional questions if you have any. While you guys bring up more questions, I'm going to go through some of the questions that individuals have asked throughout this session, and some of them I feel like applies to everybody else. So there was a question around what is the difference between critical data elements and attributes. So I know I answered the individual, but I think this applies to everybody else. The way we look at a critical data element is that for a specific business outcome, business initiative, or business domain or subject area, there are always certain elements that make or break your business. There's the privacy scenario. What are the critical data elements? And the customer or employee related information would naturally be critical in that case. Customer, date of birth, SSN, all these things, because they need to be protected. They are important to that part of the business. You define them as critical, and then you define the expectation around it, like why are they critical and what criteria do you want them to meet. So that's how we look at the critical data elements. Attributes are the representation of these elements in the applications and systems. It could be the user-friendly representation in Axon or the physical representation in actual databases and file systems. There is a question, let me go through. Okay, so there's a question about how can I see the schema database information in Axon. Primarily, Axon is to provide a user-friendly view. I mean, always look at it from the audience perspective. Axon audience is typically towards business people who are not very tech-savvy. So when they look for searchability is key. When they look for information, they would not be looking for physical fields and all. They would be looking for some user-friendly terms. So that is important. However, that said, in the data set and attribute facets, there are placeholders for physical fields And that's where you can represent the schema, database, or the actual field in Axon. Let's go through the question. So Jason Beard, if you are on call, there's a question around what's the large organization that has had zero data management? What is the best way to kick off moving the data maturity needed as a long-term program? So do you mind taking that question, please? Jason? Okay, I think Jason can. So let me answer that question. So the question was, with a large organization that has zero data management, what is the best way to kick off moving the data maturity needed as a long-term program? So to me, this refers to even prior to the technical implementation of operationalizing data governance in a certain technology. What you're talking about is laying down a vision, a charter, the kind of org council, the goals for the data governance program, the technology agnostic processes behind that. So this is a pre-technical execution phase. In case of Informatica, we have an advisory arm. For some reason, Jason Beer from that arm is not able to speak, but we kind of help our customer lay down that foundation that becomes the guiding post for the rest of the technical implementation. But that's an important part. Most of our customers have done it in some shape and form, and we can help them review it. But that's an important step of a data governance implementation. The other question is, what is the difference between CDE and glossary? In the presentation, you talked about CDE, but in the demo, you showed us as a glossary. So critical data elements is the concept, meaning there are certain elements which are very crucial to your business. They deeply care about it. Wherever those elements appear in the physical world, they want it to meet certain criteria. The definitions or the logging or the cataloging of critical data elements would start in the form of a business glossary. So if you have a critical data element, which is, let's say, asset ID. Now, asset ID is a critical data element, but then it needs to be documented in the business glossary as an asset in a particular place in the taxonomy. Hope that answers the question. Typically, how long does it take to get up and running with the first use case in an organization? So granted that you have some sort of mission vision charter in place, you have your technology agnostic strategy in place, a technical implementation, including product installation and the initial use case and the foundational element, you should account typically, if we have everything in place, all the users are in place and ready to work, you should account for a 3-month, 12-week period. That is very typical. This can go less or more, like in certain cases, there are delays, the audience is not ready, we cannot find the right participants and all that stuff. So there are factors, but a 12-week is the typical period. You should have some initial success in that. If not, then chances are that you're stuck on certain things and they are taking longer, which should not happen. What happens when business considers almost all data elements critical? We ended up with over 6,000. Should it be considered from an entity, subject area, data concept instead of discrete data element attribute level? So good question, and that I like that question. Like, you cannot start everywhere. That may be your end goal. Like, all data elements are critical. So if you remember David's slide about business problem decomposition, and I can probably put it. Let me see if I can put it back. That's okay. But you remember the business problem decomposition slide. Our goal always is, it's a typical pitfall in data governance implementation where we are focused on the quantity of the metadata in these tools. How many systems I have cataloged, how many business glossaries. What we recommend is to start with a true north, a specific outcome. Your executives have some goal, and because of that, they have approved this funding on this initiative. What are those goals? What are the KPIs and how to measure them? Now reverse engineer from them and track it back to the system, data sets and attributes, and the glossary terms that contribute towards that outcome. This way you can segregate or phase your implementation in such a way where you're not focused on thousands of terms coming into the tool. Maybe only 100 terms are relevant to that specific business outcome. But as long as we can prove that we are making a difference in your organization and adding value, this should be a phased thing. They're focused on a specific set of critical data elements and drive a specific outcome, measure that you are really producing that outcome, and then move on to the subsequent ones. The idea of just bulk loading thousands of terms over there. To me, that just drives quantity, but there is no behavior, there's no outcome over there as such. What is the approach of auto onboarding assets from EDC? This one is a very technical question. I guess we can, if you reach out to us afterwards, we can point you to the appropriate place in the documentation. There are certain steps in which you associate a glossary to a domain, and then you can auto onboard those. There are best practices around it and pitfalls as well. How can metrics be represented in Axon? Metrics will go into a category in glossary in terms of definition, and then you can associate those metrics to rules on certain data sets and attributes. Can we integrate Axon, EDC, and IDQ, all three? Yes. Now, Axon, let's talk about Axon IDQ. They are integrated. You can both ways. Axon and EDC are integrated both ways, and now in the newer version, EDC and IDQ are integrated. So yes, this is a fully integrated stack. Thank you. Okay, that. Can we still use Axon and EDC without direct connections to some data sources? Can we upload the metadata from offline sources? So Axon doesn't connect directly to any data sources to begin with. So that answers your question. In EDC, we have run into situations where our customers said that a lot of these applications that we want to scan, they would not allow us to connect. So right now, we don't support offline connections, but what they have done is that you can either offload that information in files and all and make connections to those to represent that metadata, or the other way would be to represent that through a custom connect capability. But the offline connection, and Vivek, Asit, anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but the offline data sources, I don't think we allow those connections just yet.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, so we don't have direct integration.
Right. So the one way you can bring out some of those offline resources is basically scan them offline, right, and bring it to EDC and basically upload it. But there is no direct connection.
Okay. There is a question about the scalability of EDC scans. EDC is built for scalability. So the way to look at it is that you describe your requirement, and then we size the environment accordingly. That's how it typically works. Customers have initial set of requirements and an ongoing rollout. So we size it for either whatever time frame they keep in mind, but it is built for scalability. There are certain best practices considerations. For example, if you have tables with billions of rows and you want to do profiling in EDC, we would not recommend doing profiling on every single record. You should do sampling. So barring those kind of best practices, EDC primarily, the reason it is sitting on a Hadoop cluster and the reason it is different from Axon is to build it for scalability. Okay, can we implement EDC, Axon, IDQ, EDC? Absolutely, that's good, because a lot of our historical customers actually had IDQ to begin with, and then they purchase EDC and Axon later. So to be honest, the order really does not matter. In the end, everything needs to converge together. That's where you drive real value. However, we have customers who have started at Axon or IDQ or EDC, eventually converge it into an integrated solution. So that is absolutely valid. Is the segmentation of data assets, glossary, attribute based on business domain is possible or part of the future roadmap? So segmentation was just, so if you're talking about physical segmentation where one segment would not be able to access other segment in Axon, that is actually released today as part of Axon 7. So you should check out the release notes of Axon 7, and then you have that. Up until recent versions, we did not have a segmentation where one segment physically segment this information. I know we have 2 more minutes. Let me see what other question we have. Does EDC have the ability to scan Ariba and Workday? Unless Asit and Vivek, you have already answered to this, we may take that as a follow-up.
Workday is out of the box in the latest version. Ariba, I'll have to check.
Okay, so Satish, that's your answer. When will we, okay, let me keep going to this question. We talked about the best approach. Okay, so there's a question about best approach of onboarding assets from EDC. So So auto onboarding asset, technically, I guess you guys can easily find out how to do that, but there are considerations. For example, if you turn that functionality on as is, it will introduce so much noise into Axon that you would have tough time managing that. So there are a lot of best practices around it, how to do a phased onboarding so that users get a chance to curate that information. So my key message over there be, let's not discount the importance of curation. Auto onboarding is to make your life easy so that you don't have to do it manually. However, it's the curation where we drive value and make that content usable. Is data extraction or loading similar to that of IDQ? I'm not clear on that question, but I feel we are also on the top of the hour. So Linda, I guess is this where we stop? And we can answer other questions, folks, later?
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, we appreciate everybody joining us. Thank you so much for taking time to join. Hopefully it was helpful to you. We would be running a series of these sessions on different use cases. Stay tuned and join us on those other sessions. Thank you all.